the insanity of rejecting God. And my heart is just wrecked. I'm just so grieved about, whenever I see people all over the place. I mean, just throughout my daily life, just radically rejecting God. Some are casually doing it. Some are aggressive in that. But, you even look on, in public and Hollywood and interviews of sports stars. And I just watch this. We're inundated with culture, and, we can see, YouTube, we can see into people's worlds and all the time. And there's so much ungodliness and hatred toward God and rejection of God. And it just wrecks me. I'm like, what in the world are people thinking? We have an opportunity to be in relationship with the most powerful force in the universe. And people either aggressively reject him, casually reject him, or even those that, quote unquote, choose to follow him are just apathetic. And it's not common to find people that are really, really in love with Jesus. And I'm, of course they're out there, but I don't know. Are you like me? Are you just wrecked by this? I absolutely am. And I think about this, my own life, my own journey. And I remember back in the day when I was watching people. I'd see them, man. I mean, and these are people that I was like playing video games with, normal people and all. And so we're playing video games one moment, and the next moment, they invite me to church, and I'm at church with them, and they're on their knees and they're crying out to God. And I'm like, that can't be fake. It just can't be fake, because I know them. They're legit. They're real. And one minute they're being normal, playing video games. The next minute they're doing this. And it caused me to be hungry. And I'm like, wow, and see, I grew up in the church, and I grew up Christian and legitimately so. Most of my life I was very moral and very, I had a desire for God. In fact, I was very bold in high school, and I stood up for God, and I, in big ways. But there came a time when I'm like, I don't know that I've ever really met him. I mean, really met him. And especially watching these friends of mine and watching these different people, how they've got this crazy connection with this invisible God. What is that all about? And I started to hunger, but I was very real with my pursuit. And this is what I mean. I was in the church one day by myself, and man, I was being stirred. In hindsight, the Holy Spirit was rocking me, and I didn't know what was going on. I had yet to really encounter God. I had never really felt him. None of that. All of it was just very intellectual, wondering and questioning and thinking about it. Is it possible? Could this be true? And I've read the Bible, and I've gone to church, and I've seen things, over my life, but here we are, kind of rubber meeting road kind of moment. And all right, God, is this real? And I was young. I was 20 years old, or I don't know, 21, something like that. And I remember thinking about my life, and I did not want to waste my life, chasing after some God that either didn't exist or was not good and real and powerful. Didn't want to waste my time. I mean, there's so many other things to do. There's so many other ways to spend your day than doing this God thing. I mean, I didn't want to do the God thing. But if he was legit, I did. And I remember I was in the church alone, and I remember talking to him. I mean, I was basically talking to the air. I didn't know what was going on, and I just cried out. I'm like, all right, God, here's the deal. If you are not all that you're cracked up to be, if you're not a miracle worker, if you're not all powerful, if you're not, a healer, if you're not one that I can know, if you're not alive, if none of that is true, I told him, I spoke it out loud. I don't want anything to do with you. Nothing. Not going to waste my time. Who would? Why would you want to waste your time? But then as my heart was just getting wrecked, I'm like, and my hunger was increasing, still not ever experiencing God. In that moment, I said, but God, if you are all these things, I will die for you. I will die for you. And I walked around that room, and all I knew to say was, God, you know my heart. And I'm talking to a God I didn't know. And I'm like, all right, you know my heart. That's all I could say. And I walked around that room over and over, and I'll never forget it, just looking out the windows as I'm passing by and seeing the trees outside, and all alone in that dark, big kind of fellowship hall room, just by myself. And all I could say was, God, you know my heart. That's it. You know my heart. And it was right after that where I was in a service. Now you got to understand, I was extremely timid, extremely shy. I would never get up in front of anybody and speak, ever. All of a sudden, in the middle of a service, I'll never be able to describe it, but God absolutely overwhelmed me. And for the first time, I raised my hands. I was overtaken by a supernatural, powerful force. It was real, and I knew it was Jesus. I knew it was God. I knew it was him. You know, and he responds to hungry hearts. He does that. He responds to a hungry heart. That very moment, I got up and I asked to take the mic, and I prophesied what God had spoken to my heart in that moment. And people, their jaws were hanging open as they were watching me do this, because they knew that John Burton never did that. And that was the transformative moment in my life where everything changed. You know, again, I'm talking about this idea that rejecting God is absolute insanity. And from that moment to now, that's been 28 years. My goodness, that's a long time. I have experienced the most phenomenal encounters with God. I've written in my book about many of these in my books, but there are way too many to list. And for me, it's absolutely entirely impossible for me not to believe in God. And not only not to believe in God, but it's impossible for me not to know that he's alive, he's real, he's good, he's all powerful, and he's out to change the world. I don't know. I'm just thinking about this, and it wrecks me. It just wrecks me that there are people out there and they just reject God because they've never left that intellectual place. They've never opened their heart. They've never done that. They've never hungered. They've never cried out to God. They've never given God a chance. Never really given him a chance. And here they are. They're either atheists or just pure, ungodly type of, people, and it messes me up. And I think of all the times, I think of the radical miracles that I've experienced. I think of the time right when my wife and I got married, and I was working for the airlines just before we got married, and I was lifting heavy luggage into an airplane down on the ramp, and I tore my rotator cuff. It was some intense pain, and I was living with that pain all the time, and I couldn't even put my arm around her. That arm, I couldn't, if you touched it, it felt like someone was driving a nail through my shoulder. The pain was really bad. And one morning, shortly after we were married, she got up early to go to class. She was at Lee University in Cleveland, Tennessee, and I was still asleep. And all of a sudden, as I was sleeping and maybe 10% awake, I felt this liquid oil, this honey, this fire, this burning, whatever you want to call it, just start to ooze all over my shoulder. And it was amazing. It was warm, and I just went into a deep sleep. I didn't even know what was happening. I woke up a little bit later and my shoulder was 100% healed. And I found out later that Amy had woken up that morning and she was tired of me having that injury. And she laid her hands on my shoulder and she prayed, and I was totally healed. I went out in the backyard. We lived in the country, and I picked up giant rocks and I started hurling them through the air, which never would have been able to do that with my injury. And so I think of that. I think of the time when I was in California, and I was a youth pastor, and I took the youth to this vineyard worship conference, and oh my goodness, man, this one young lady got so baptized in fire. I can't even begin to tell you what that was like. But I'm watching all of this happen, and all of a sudden, this wave of God. I was just enjoying myself. I was just watching other people getting rocked by God. And this wave of God, just this invisible force just washes over me. And I hit the ground and I'm like, whoa. And I'm on my face and I'm just there. And everything around me just disappears. And it's indescribable. See, this is why so many people reject God. They're like, that makes no sense. You must be emotionally crazy. It's an emotion that you had, or it's a sixth sense. It's the best way to explain it. It's encountering deity. It's encountering the invisible, the supernatural realm, and so this force just overwhelmed me, and I'm laying there on the ground for I don't know how long, and all of a sudden the lights start flickering in the place. There were hundreds and hundreds of people there, and I kind of peek up, and there's just a few people left, me being one of them, and then the youth. They were there wondering what they're going to do with John, and so they kind of say, John, we gotta go. So they help me up to my feet and they get me out to the van, and they're like, John, how are you going to drive the van? I could barely walk. And I pulled it off, and we got back to the hotel. I'll never forget what I saw there, as that was the hotel that many of these different groups were staying at that were attending the conference, and people all over the place. It was late at night, about 11, 12 at night, all over the place. People were carrying people because they were so overwhelmed and undone by the presence of God. I mean, all over the place. And they're carrying people, they're helping them walk. They're literally carrying them into the hotel. And I barely made it into the hotel myself. And listen, that is not some mass emotional hysteria. It's not what that is. It was legitimately God moving. And again, these types of experiences, I'm like, how could anybody ever reject Jesus? It makes no sense. It's maddening, and I wrote this article. I'll probably pop this video, right there in the article there on my website. But I wrote this article, and I know there's reasons. There's a lot of reasons people reject God, but some of them, the big idea for me is they've just never met him. They've never encountered him. They've never cried out to him. They've misunderstood the way that God works. They've misunderstood, they want God to satisfy their personal desires, when it's not about that. It's that he died for us already. What else could he do? Now it's our turn to lay down our lives and to surrender all. And but what would happen if I was in Starbucks writing the article yesterday, and what would happen, and I had this thought, and it really the spirit of intercession came upon me. What would happen in Hollywood if suddenly, the presence of God overtook movie sets? What would happen? What would happen if Tom Cruise and Samuel L. Jackson and Jennifer Lawrence and Will Smith and on and on? What if they legitimately encountered God? Because so many think this Christianity thing is just this kind of this logical decision. Let me read the Bible, see what I think about it, and yeah, it's a good idea. I want to go to heaven, so I'll sign up for that. It's not that. It's when an invisible God is suddenly real and alive in your life, and again, man, I mean, the experiences and the encounters that I have are just unending. And like I said, it's impossible for me to ever think that God's not real. Impossible. Can't happen. In the midst of all sorts of turmoil and stuff and trials in life, you know, that I have, I just can't, it's just not possible. The things that he's done are just ridiculous. You know, in fact, it's impossible not to believe in God after seeing the things I've seen and experienced the things I've experienced and having the dreams that he's given me and confirming prophetic words and working miracles and healing and all of this. It's just impossible. It's absolutely, completely, entirely impossible. And so I just wanted to get that out there. I mean, my testimony is as someone who's you know, imperfect and has trials, I've never lost my fire. Why? How can you lose your fire for Jesus after legitimately encountering him? You know, it said that you know, 1 second in the presence of God will cure any skeptic. And I believe that if we're truly in God's presence and there's this supernatural force that overwhelms us, how can we ever not believe? But to get to that point, there has to be a hunger in your heart. There has to be a desire. There has to be a relentlessness. You've got to go after God. It's like, because he's not playing games. He doesn't want us to play games. He's not going to just jump through our hoops. He's not going to look at us as we're wagging our finger at him. All right, God, I'm not happy with the way you do things. You got to prove yourself to me before I follow you. It's not how it works. We got to humble ourselves. We got to surrender all, you know. And I want to encourage you to just redesign my book cover here, but I want to encourage you to get this book. I actually have a typo in it, so this might be very valuable someday. Can you see the typo? Can you see that? I misspelled the word, and but I fixed it. I've got another copy coming. But this book right here, The Terror of Hell, you know, you talk about impossible to not believe that God's real. I mean, I had an encounter, and that resulted in that book. And it's all about intimacy with Jesus and encountering Jesus and how that works and how that's related to eternity. And I encourage you to get that book. But bottom line is, I encourage you to fall in love with Jesus. I encourage you to go hardcore after him, to seek, to walk around that room like I did and just say, I don't want anything to do with you, God, if you're not legit. But if you are, I will die for you. I will lay down my life for you. And he's proven himself to me over and over and over again. So leave me some comments down below. What do you think about this? Are you a skeptic? You know, it wrecks me. God could not be more real. The supernatural stuff that I've experienced, the love of God, the peace, the joy, the freedom, the healing, you know, all of that stuff that has happened in my life, man. I want that for everybody. I want it for everybody. And by the way, I'll leave you with this. I asked a question on Facebook. Why do you think it is that people reject Jesus? And people had a variety of answers, but one of the answers that several people had was this. People reject Jesus because his followers, Christians, don't represent him well. And I want to speak to that real quick. Sure, it's probably true. But here's the insanity of that defense. Why would anybody make their determination on whether God is legit or not based on how an imperfect person represents a perfect deity? Why? It just doesn't make any sense at all. Why would I look at somebody as a representative of somebody else and determine that somebody else is not real and not legit because his representative is a failure, or his representative is weak, or his representative has not truly been transformed by a relationship with him? I would never do that. You can never do that. It doesn't make any sense at all. People will always disappoint you. A perfect God doesn't make us absolutely flawless in terms of now we have no issues, we have no idiosyncrasies, we have no personality quirks, we have no We never have to wrestle with temptation. We never have to wrestle with apathy. That's not the case. We're being sanctified. We're growing and learning and maturing and being discipled and developing. And so don't ever, even though I take it very seriously on how I live my life, don't ever determine that God is not good and God is not all powerful and God is not legit if you see me doing something that you don't like. You're only hurting yourself. It just doesn't make any sense. I mean, think about it. Think about a wonderful person in the world that you would like to meet. I don't know who that person would be. Queen Elizabeth. I don't know. I don't, maybe you don't want to meet her, but let's just pretend. If one of her guards or one of her royal subjects was a jerk, would that mean that Queen Elizabeth is not a good queen? Well, of course not. It doesn't make any sense. So why do people turn on God? Because God's royal subjects don't know how to live, don't know how to act. Why would that be the case? It makes no sense. So I want to leave that with you. Go after God. Go after him. Seek after him. Hunger after him. Lay it all down. Humble yourself. Surrender all. And man, I'll tell you what, he'll blow you away. There will be not enough books in the world to record everything that God does that blows your mind. So